So in this tutorial we will create a volume, we'll resize a volume, we will then move a volume to a different aggregate, we will rehost a volume to another SVM, we will thin provision, and finally we will delete a volume. So let's have a look at it. So we're logged into the cluster shell, and because we need two storage virtual machines, maybe you still have your storage virtual machines, but I'm going to create two new ones very quickly. The first one is going to be SVM Blue, and the root volume of this SVM will be in node 1 Agger 1, and the second one will be SVM Red, same story, although the root volume will be in the data aggregate of node 2. So now we've set up our storage virtual machines and we can start creating volumes. Let's first have a look at the volumes already present. Obviously, SVM Blue has only got one volume, which is the blue root volume. Then we are going to create our first volume. It's going to be in SVM Blue, and the name will be NES_vol, and the size will be 500 megabytes. So we create it in the first aggregate, and we see that we've created a new volume, 500 megabytes, and it belongs to SVM Blue. Then, in order to be able to access it as a client, the volume has to be mounted, and the junction path will be /nes. Could be any name, but we call it /nes. Then it warns us that the export policy, this has to do with NFS. We're not going to talk about this right now. We simply confirm that we know that the volume will not be accessible. Now we check the junction path, and we see that the root volume is mounted to / and the NAS volume is mounted to /nes. Now, as we discussed, we can resize a volume on the fly. Doesn't matter if clients are using it or not, we can simply resize it, and we can also move it. So let's take the volume and move it to a different aggregate. So we run vol move start and define that it should be in aggregate on node 2. And it's still replicating, so it says I'm moving the volume, 24% on the way. And after some time, when we do a vol move show again, it says it's done. Obviously, if you have a very large volume, that will take a lot longer. But this is a very small volume, so that's done in a second. Then we do a volume unmount, which means that the junction path will be removed from the root volume. So this is disruptive to clients, but we have to unmount it if we want to rehost the volume by a different storage virtual machine. So we're going to rehost the NAS volume from SVM Blue to SVM Red, like this. And a very important thing to realize and keep in mind is that a volume that is rehosted to another SVM will lose all of its policies, because policies are SVM based. Also, the security settings may differ between the two storage virtual machines, so you want to make sure that you get no unwanted access to that volume because of different security settings. After the rehosting has completed, we check it and see that the volume is now part of SVM Red. We should not forget to mount it again. So we ignore the export policy warning and the volume will be mounted. Now let's discuss thin provisioning. We first list the aggregates and notice that node 2 Agger 1 has some 8 gigabytes of available space and 8 volumes. We create a volume called thinvol of 5 gigabytes with the space guarantee of none in the second aggregate. So this means that no space for this volume will be reserved in the aggregate. Then we check the available space in the aggregate and see that apart from some overhead, there is no space reserved even though we created a 5 gig volume. But we set the space guarantee to none. Now we create a second volume, but this time we set the space guarantee to volume, which means that it will carve out 5 gigabytes of reservation for this volume, and the aggregate will have less available space left. And we see we've only got some 3 gigabytes left in the aggregate. And finally, let's see how we delete a volume. We know we have to unmount the volume first, then offline it, and only then can we delete it. So we unmount, we offline, and we delete. And we're done.